I'm like, this lady cannot catch a break. Okay, sis, let me tell you something. The Book of Ruth, this is not just some little quiet Bible story. This story is giving loss, drama, loyalty, plot twist, and a man that shows up at the right time. If you haven't already, grab yourself a mocktail and get comfortable because we are about to jump into it. So this story happens during the time of Judges. And if you know anything about Judges, you know that spiritually it was chaotic. People were doing whatever they wanted. Nobody was really consistent with God. And leadership was shaky. I'm talking rocky. It was one of those seasons where the nation technically knew God, but wasn't really living like it. So as you can imagine, it's already not the best environment. And the story opens in Bethlehem. Yes, that Bethlehem, the future birthplace of Jesus. But right now, there's a famine in Bethlehem, the place that literally means house of bread. So imagine living in the house of bread with no bread. I thought that this was so interesting, that there was a famine that rose in Bethlehem and people literally had nothing to eat. I was like, okay, God, what's the irony here? So Naomi and her husband Elimelech, they moved with their 2 sons to Moab. Now, Moab wasn't just down the street. The Moabites and the Israelites had history, okay? And it wasn't just like, oh, okay, like that's my cousin and we don't really mess with them like that. They had history and it was awkward territory. They didn't move because it was cute. They moved because they needed to survive. And sis, I'm telling you that this part matters because Naomi, she didn't just move from house to house. She left her homeland. She left her community. She left her identity. She left everything familiar. Bethlehem wasn't just where she lived. Bethlehem was a part of God's promised land. So leaving wasn't just practical. It was one of those decisions that you make when life just gets so scary and you don't know what to do. And if we're being honest, we've all been in those seasons. We've been in seasons where fear made us move faster than faith. You take the job, or it could be you leaving the city, or, just shifting directions. Not because you don't trust God, but because you don't see him moving yet. Naomi left Bethlehem in famine, not knowing that she would eventually come back in harvest. And that's important because by the time life starts taking things from her, she's already carrying that displacement. Before we step into Ruth, I really need you to see the bigger picture. Because Naomi and her family, they don't just leave Bethlehem because of famine. They move into a completely different culture. They go from Judah, where Bethlehem is located, and where people worship the God of Israel, into Moab, where different gods, different customs, and values really shape their everyday life. So Naomi, she's not just adjusting to a new home. She's living in a place that doesn't reflect her beliefs, her traditions, or her sense of belonging. They stay there for about 10 years, and during that time, she loses her husband and her sons. So by the time Ruth even enters the story, Naomi isn't just grieving. She's grieving in a place that never fully felt like home. And that's where our story begins. All right, so let's fast forward because now they are in Moab. And the first thing that happens is that Naomi's husband dies. Straight for the jugular. Her husband dies. That's already devastating. And then her sons marry Moabite women, Orpah and Ruth. But then both of her sons died too. I'm like, this lady cannot catch a break. Her husband dies, both of her sons die. Now her and her 2 daughter-in-laws are widows. And sis, at that point, Naomi isn't just sad. Her entire future looks empty. She's widowed, no children, she's getting older, and she's stuck in a place that is not hers. Like, imagine losing your family, your security, and your sense of belonging all at once. That's where Naomi is. And this isn't just emotional pain. In that culture, men meant protection, future, income, and security. Naomi's future looked real empty. So when she hears that Bethlehem has food again, sis is like, oh, okay, like, let me go get my plate. I'm going home. And while they're on the road, she tells Orpah and Ruth, okay, well, stay here. And Orpah is like, okay, I'm going to stay here, like, with my people and my family. Y'all go on ahead back to Bethlehem, and, I'll see you when I see you. But that made sense. She stayed where she belonged. But Ruth clings to Naomi. And this is where Ruth says something that honestly changes the whole story. She looks at Naomi and she says in chapter 1, verse 16, where you go, I'll go. Where you stay, I'll stay. Your people will be my people and your God, my God. Now, I want to pause here really quick because this isn't just a sweet, loyal moment. Ruth is basically saying, I don't know how this is going to work. I don't know what my life is going to look like. I don't know if I'll be safe, provided for, or okay. But I'm choosing your God anyway. And this was a prime example of choosing God before you know what he's going to do for you. Sis, this is wild faith. Because Ruth makes this decision before she even meets Boaz. Before she even meets the man. Because we always talk about I can't wait to find my Boaz. But what are you willing to sacrifice before you even know what God is going to reward you with? What are you willing to surrender? For so many years, I always said, I can't wait to be a wife. But I didn't even understand what the covenant meant. What it meant to be in covenant with somebody under God. You watch Say Yes to the Dress and you're like, oh my gosh, I can't wait until it's my turn. I can't wait to have a Boaz. But do you know what that will require of you? Do you know how much surrender and sacrifice you have to put into a marriage? What does that look like? Okay, so back to Ruth and Boaz. Ruth makes this decision before she even knows that Boaz exists. Before provision, before stability, and before anything changes, she chooses God in the uncertainty. And if we're being honest, most of us want to choose God after things make sense. We want confirmation first. We want security first. We want the outcome first. But Ruth, she says yes in the unknown. And right there is the becoming moment of her story. Because everything that happens later starts with that decision. So I want to talk about Naomi really quick right here. Because when they get to Bethlehem, she is just so upset. She's so sad. And she's bitter. Everyone's excited to see her. And she says, don't call me Naomi, call me Mara, which means bitter. And this is saying life didn't just hurt me. Life changed me. And honestly, that's real. Sometimes grief will shift how we see ourselves. But then scripture drops this little detail. They arrived in Bethlehem at the beginning of the barley harvest. Sis, Naomi is thinking that her life is over. Naomi is so broken that she says, she wants to go home. And I'm convinced that she wanted to go home and she was prepared to be alone and die. She was that broken. So while Naomi thinks that her life is over, God's provision season has just started. She just can't see it yet. Okay, so at this point, Ruth is basically like, okay, we need to eat. Nobody is coming to save us. So I'm about to go out and figure something out. So she goes out to the field where people are harvesting and she picks up, the extra food that's being left behind. It's not glamorous. It's not cute. Sis is just doing what she needs to do to survive, okay? And tell me why she just happens to end up working on Boaz's field. Now, I need a pause right here because this man, he just happens to be fine, well-respected, kind, and family of Naomi's late husband. I was like, okay, God, I see the setup here. I see you. And the Bible says that she just happens to be there. But we both know with God, nothing just happens. So Boaz notices her. He hears her story. And he is just so moved by it. Not just like, oh, wow, that's so sad. He makes sure that nobody messes with her. So he protects her. He invites her to eat. So he provides for her, and he literally tells his other workers to drop extra food for her on purpose. That's favor. Enough for the day, enough to keep going, and enough to remind you that God hasn't forgotten about you. So Boaz hears her story, he sees her working, and then he says something that seems so small when you read it, but spiritually it's just so big. He tells her in Ruth chapter 2 verse 12, "May the Lord repay you for what you've done. May you be richly rewarded by the Lord, the God of Israel, under whose wings you have come to take refuge." And when I read that, I always pause, because Ruth probably didn't feel like she was taking refuge. She probably felt like she was just surviving, just following Naomi, just trying to eat, just trying to make it. But heaven saw it differently. God saw her choice to follow Naomi not as desperation, but as faith. And sometimes obedience feels like, God, I'm just doing the best I can right now. But spiritually, you're positioning yourself under his wings. And that's what Boaz is recognizing right here. He's basically saying, God sees what you did. God sees your loyalty. God sees the choices that you've made and the choices that you're making. And he's covering you because of it. You might feel like you're just trying to survive, but God sees you as protected. Because sometimes being under God's wings doesn't seem dramatic. It just feels like you're doing the right thing, you're trusting him, and hoping that it works out. But spiritually, you're covered. And that's a word for us too, because sometimes you think you're just holding it together, but God sees it as you walking in faith. So Ruth goes home with way more food than Naomi expected. And Naomi is like, okay, well, whose field were you in? When Ruth says Boaz, Naomi's entire tone changes. Because Boaz isn't just some random guy with land. He's someone who could actually help to restore their future. So now Naomi is like, okay, God, like you might be on to something right here. Because for the first time since the loss, she sees that there's a door that may not be closed. So she tells Ruth straight up, Boaz is not just kind. He's someone that can actually help us to restore our future. And she gives Ruth a plan. Now, on the surface, it sounds kind of wild. She tells Ruth to go to the threshing floor and to lie at Boaz's feet at night. But I'm telling you, it wasn't scandalous. It wasn't. It was symbolic. This was Ruth basically telling Boaz, I'm not here to play games. I'm asking for covering and I'm asking for redemption. So when Boaz wakes up and asks who she is, Ruth says this. In chapter 3, verse 9, she says, I am your servant Ruth. Spread the corner of your garment over me, since you are a redeemer of our family. And I love this moment, sis, because Ruth isn't hinting. She's not being dramatic. She's respectfully saying, I trust that God might be working through this moment, so I'm stepping forward. And sis, that's faith too. Because sometimes we think that faith means waiting quietly. And trust me, I'm not telling you to slide in nobody's DMs. I'm not telling you to go out there and pursue a man, because we know that that's not what we're supposed to be doing. But I am saying that sometimes faith looks like having the conversation, taking the step and speaking honestly, and also trusting God with what happens next. And Boaz doesn't shame her and he doesn't dismiss her. Instead, he says something that feels like a little quiet payoff of the entire story. He says in chapter 3, verse 11, all the people of my town know that you are a woman of noble character. He's basically saying, I see your integrity. I see your faithfulness, and your life speaks for itself. Because Ruth wasn't trying to impress anyone. Sis was just showing up faithfully. And somehow, quiet obedience became her reputation. So Boaz says, yes, he wants to redeem her. But there's one step left. There's a closer relative that has first rights. So now we wait. Because sometimes God lets you see that he's moving, but the story still unfolds one step at a time. And what I love about this moment is that Ruth doesn't know how it's going to turn out just yet. She doesn't know if Boaz will actually be able to redeem her. She doesn't know what tomorrow looks like. She just knows that she trusted God enough to step forward. And sis, that's where so many of us are. We've prayed, we've obeyed, and we've taken the step. And now we're just waiting to see what God does with it. But Ruth's story reminds us that obedience is never wasted, even when the outcome hasn't shown up yet. All right, so now we're in chapter 4, and Boaz goes to the city gate, which is like the legal center. In Ruth's time, the city gate, it wasn't just the entrance. It was basically the town city hall, the courthouse, the business center, and the meeting place. All of the above. Everything happened at the city gates. This is where legal decisions were made, property decisions happened, disputes were settled, witnesses gathered, and this is actually where leaders sat and, handled community business. So when the Bible says that Boaz went to the city gate, he didn't go there to play games with his friends. He went to the official place that legal matters were handled so that the redemption could be done publicly and properly. Think of it like not playing house for 20 years, but actually going to the courthouse to make it official. Boaz wanted everything done right. He wanted it to be witnessed, and he wanted it to be binding. So he offers the closer relative a chance to redeem Naomi's land. And the man says yes, until he realizes that it includes marrying Ruth. When I read this, I was just like, now what would Boaz have done if the man was just like, oh, okay, yes, I'll take Ruth to be my wife. Okay, cool. Then the entire plan would have fallen apart. But then suddenly this man is like, actually, I'm good. Boaz steps forward and redeems everything. He marries Ruth. Naomi thought that her story ended in loss, but she ends up holding Ruth's baby. That baby becomes the grandfather of King David, which means that Ruth becomes a part of the lineage of Jesus. Now, sis, God used famine, grief, migration, loyalty, and survival to position her in this redemption history. When I first read this story, I don't think that I connected all of the dots about how Ruth saying that she would follow Naomi set her up to be in the lineage of Jesus Christ. God used her, yes. Nothing about her life looked glamorous while she was living it, but it was all about positioning. Our becoming message for the Book of Ruth is that God is still working even when he's quiet. Your obedience, it might outlive you. Loyalty opens doors that you can't even see yet, but nothing that God allows is wasted. So I really want you to think about what it would take for you to be faithful in this season. Not because you see the outcome yet, but because you trust who God is. All right, sis, I want to thank you for joining me as we hopped into the Book of Ruth today. I'm just so excited that you're here. I'm happy for this journey of becoming because, we cannot do it without one another. I honestly believe that this is not the end for this text, so you might see a part 2. If you're interested, just let me know in the comments below. And don't forget to like, comment, subscribe, share it with your sister, all of the things, because I would love to hear from you. I want to hear about your journeys and really get to know y'all a little bit. I also want to share that becomingsimone.com is live. So head over to becomingsimone.com. I have lots of blogs and really just pouring my heart out and all the little funny things that happen in my life and on this journey of becoming. Again, I love you. I'm happy that you're here and I can't wait for our next study. I'll see you soon. Bye.